So roles, again, very similar to our playbooks. We're just not using the tasks keyword. We're using roles. Roles have tasks in them, so it's a nice little chain. So tasks are always kind of run last. Again, very easy. We're listing our hosts and our connection variables. We're saying what role we want to run, and then we're putting any variables or other options we need to put down here. Again, we are running the role from a playbook. So this whole thing is a playbook, and we can put multiple playbooks in the same file. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. So if you are running multiple roles, you can put them concurrently in the same file. So why would you want to do that? You don't want to run two roles in the same playbook because you want everything to have independent variables. Probably. Can you run multiple roles with the same playbook? Absolutely. Okay. So this is just a piece of advice, and I'm going to cover this as quick as possible. Ansible has a repository online called Ansible Galaxy, and a very nice little command syntax to get roles and collections of code. This makes Ansible even more powerful because now you're getting these sometimes curated code from the internet with just running. You don't have to grab a Git repo if you don't want to. You could just use the Ansible Galaxy command to install a role and then just start integrating that into your playbooks. I want everybody to be very careful, and this comes from my knowledge of a YouTuber named Jeff Geerling. I don't want to say a single bad thing about Jeff. Jeff is an awesome engineer. He is literally the guy that wrote the book on Ansible development. His Ansible for DevOps book is one of my favorite reads. However, he got the YouTube bug, and now he makes lots of YouTube videos on Raspberry Pis, and that's awesome. And because of this, I know that he has Crohn's, and he was in the hospital, and he has kids, and all this stuff's going on in his life. And I wish him well. I hope he recovers. But he's not updating all of the repositories that he's maintained in the past for Ansible. So all of the Geerling Guy roles that we know of are kind of getting stagnant. So I hope Jeff gets better, but I personally wouldn't use any of the Geerling Guy roles because they're just not being supported anymore. So you certainly don't have to do that level of research on everybody that writes these roles. Every Ansible Galaxy role is connected to a GitHub repo, and you can look for signs that the role is stagnant. So the biggest sign you're going to see is issues opened, and forks, right? So this is, we're mostly dealing with Unix here. So you might not see an update for a year, and that's perfectly fine. There might not need to be an update for a year. However, it's really important to take a gander and be a little bit selective on what roles you're using. Now, a couple companies like the Nginx company that makes an awesome load balancer, they're owned by F5. They support this open source role to install both their open source and their licensed product. So you probably can see that the Nginx controller has a score based on the community's voting. A really high one for the Nginx controller, but the core has a really low one. So you might want to use that score as well to scrutinize your choices. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, so this is the putting it all together. So if you're going to run this on an entire environment, you might want to start looking at the documentation on what your file structure should look like. So at the top, you could have your production staging, or like maybe even a test inventory file. So you don't have to keep on, You don't have to keep on going back and changing a file, your inventory. You can have more than one file for your inventories. This is how we can stage our group variables with a group variable. You can also make folders. So if you have more than one file, so if you're doing something like you're like, no, I'm not going to use SSH keys. I'm going to vault everything. You can put your vaulted files inside of a host folder. So you could say host vars and then the host name and make that a folder, and then stick your vars and your vaulted files inside of that. And then custom modules. You could also make a custom role folder if that's a thing. Filter plugins. These are all optional. You don't have to use any of these if you don't want to. I don't think a lot of people write a ton of modules and custom filters. Your site. So that would be your quote unquote master playbook. I took this directly from the Ansible documentation. I did not reinvent the wheel. And then if you have different playbooks for like situations, you have to reboot these every so often. You could have different specific ones. So lots of other, you can mess around with this and find the file structure that works the best for you. It is a good way of putting all of your code in a single file or a single folder, and then version control it with Git or something else. Please don't use SVN. SVN, I think, is going to be a nightmare if you're not already using it. Please use something more modern than Subversion. Use Git if you can. All right, and then I'm gonna demo most of the stuff out, but just final couple like just tips real quick. Ansible lint, completely free. It's just going to tell you if your YAML file checks the sniff test, right? So passes the sniff test. So linting is pretty awesome. If you don't like actually having to run a tool, if you're developing in VS Code or another editor, another IDE, just see if you can find an extension for linting. There's literally dozens of them out there. There's a couple built-in ones for Ansible as well. There's a dry run option that adds on all of this. This is a Unix command, so you can do more than just use the manual page, see what all your options are. But the -- check is the equivalent of dry run, so that will log in and figure out everything that will not actually make a change on the server. So it will log in and it will do everything it can except make an actual change on the server, which is just fantastic. So that will help you check to make sure, test your playbooks and rolls out. Use a test environment if you can. Never try to, guess and make sure you're, depend that your Ansible is going to run perfectly on the first try. Always try to test everything as much as possible. And then lastly, read the documentation. The documentation is so lovely. I don't get to say that very often. It's written very well. There are very few projects this well supported. Please read the documentation. The Ansible guys put a lot of work, guys and gals, put a lot of work into it. Please read the documentation. Everything that I've talked about today can literally be found in the pages of the documentation. You don't have to go anywhere else. It's a one-stop shop. It is pretty fantastic. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of demos, and I'm going to start out with some ad hoc commands, and I'm just gonna kind of go through some of the stuff that I talked about, just to kind of reinforce and show people how useful it can be. So I can use the ad hoc command, saying all of the hosts, and then I can use the inventory file hosts, and I can list them out. So this is I'm still logged into a web server. Gotta love the demo guides. So that should be, yep, that should work just about as well as you can when you're not uh, spending the time it takes to read properly what you just typed. So this is a really powerful way of running commands in ad hoc. However, that's a lot of typing for just listing out all the hosts. There is also a ability. I stacked a whole bunch of books in front of me to hold my camera up, so I'm doing my best, guys. So we also have the Ansible console, which is just awesome because now we can literally just type list hosts that way, and we can ping all of them. And this is going to be our output. Our output comes in JSON. We can run our ad hoc commands directly from Ansible console. And we could also do things like run the help command. Help command is going to give us all of our modules. And then if we wanted to go specifically and find out, he just ran the ping command, what actually did that do? We can dive into that and get the documentation directly, kind of like a man page, but more specifically like Python's help function. So very powerful thing, really easy to use. Please check it out if you want. And then have to run when we're running a playbook, we use Ansible -playbook instead of just Ansible. And then we can run our Chuck to get our Chuck Norris playbook. So the debug command is going to, and this is what I wanted to point out. The debug command is going to give us everything from the REST call, right? So we have to, oh, I'm so glad that it's an appropriate joke and it's not something off color. It's going to give us our value down here. And then we're going to have a new file called cool. So if we look for cool.txt, we could see just that joke. So if you remember the Chuck playbook, results.json.value and how I access that nested value, we could see it's very easy, results.json.value. Just very simple. The documentation does its best to represent that, but sometimes you just need to see it in a visual fashion to understand that's how we access that value. So again, I do want to point out as I clear my screen, I do want to point out that all this is these are all Linux commands, right? So there's manual pages for Ansible. So we can see things that are typical Unix conventions, like the -v pattern for verbosity. So if we wanted verbosity, if we wanted to run it in the check mode, all these options are going to be in the man page. So you don't have to remember anything and you don't have to study this stuff. You can always look at the documentation. It's all around you if you look hard enough. So I know I'm running out of time, but I wanted to we'll quickly take that Chuck and we'll just mangle the we'll just mangle that YAML a little bit, and we'll write it, and then we'll use Ansible lint, and then Chuck, and then oh, I'm not going to do it. It will just tell you that your Ansible I did not install it because I did everything through Python. It will just tell you that one line's off. It's going to give you a line number and a really easy to read command, a really easy to read error message, which is just very easy to run. But I do want to show you guys. I wrote a playbook that I included called that will update Debian servers, just really easy. It's a little bit longer than the other ones, but I wanted to demonstrate the check function as the last thing that I show off today. So it's going to run through it like the regular playbook, but it's not actually going to update or reboot anything. So again, Ansible playbook. We're going to say Debian update, and then I'm just going to throw the ask become pass and check. And it's going to run through all of my hosts without actually actually I think it's just the one host for this one, but it checked everything. So if we look at the output, it checked everything, but it skipped it because we ran it in check mode. So it's just really fantastic that there's an option to do that. And it's always great to figure out where you're going to have issues before you actually start rebooting or changing your environment when you don't actually know if the entire playbook's going to run or not. So awesome. So I'm gonna see what other questions are available, Bill and Jason. But I want to just as to end off, I just wanted to encourage everybody to use and support open source software and to check out Ansible and see if it can help you out in your job. And hopefully at some point you guys will have me back and I'll do some more advanced topics.
We'd love to have you. 100%, David. Thank you very much. I just one quick one from Q&A was what would be a good example or advantage of using Ansible to deploy containers instead of using an orchestration tool as a Portainer, for instance?
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a fantastic question. So there's lots of advantages to using a specific made tool like Portainer. I'm very familiar. However, when you're trying to put everything in auditable code that you can version control and you can maintain exactly, you could do the same way every single time, Ansible is going to have your back. So that standardization is going to be hugely powerful. But Portainer is also a pretty awesome way of going. It's all kind of in your organization's strategy. So Ansible has some great options for dealing not just with container orchestration, but also wrangling Ansible clusters and dealing with the infrastructure behind containers. So highly recommend you check out things like KubeSpray. KubeSpray is a huge project right now where you're actually deploying a whole Kubernetes environment with Ansible.
Awesome.
So,
David, thank you very much.
Yep. David, thank you. Bill, thank you for responding to questions and helping during the webcast.